Nobody does it quite like Yu Hayashida, the genius behind Dorohedoro and one of the most creative minds in the manga industry that you will ever bear witness to. Strap yourselves in because today we're going to take a look at Hayashida's evolution over the years, her influences, and everything else in between. It's actually pretty difficult to find information on Yu Hayashida because they are a very private individual. They've never actually shown their face before and choose to present themselves with a bag or hood over their head. What we know is that she attended the Tokyo University of Arts under oil painting. It was during that time that she began to think about submitting her own work to publishers. She liked the idea of people reading and consuming her own stories and was a big fan of manga herself. The Kodansha published Monthly Afternoon was having its quarterly manga newcomer contest called the Kodansha Afternoon Four Seasons Award in 1997. It was there that her career as a mangaka kicked off by winning in second place with her story Sofa-chan. As you would come to expect from somebody who's just starting to make manga, you can definitely see the art is a bit rougher in comparison to her later work, but a lot of the tropes that commonly are associated with her artwork are already being established here. Sofa-chan herself is a voluptuous and naked ghost with very weird, veiny parts coming out of her eyes. Yu Hayashida stated that she has a preference for drawing naked characters, and not for the reasons you think. She actually looks at nudity as a form of comedy in a lot of her segments because it puts characters in an awkward place. She also enjoyed reading manga as a child that featured half-naked badass women. This isn't done with the intention to demean her female characters because most of them are still very capable and strong. The art actually looks a bit cleaner than what her modern style would adapt to. It does look gritty, but there's not so much heavy texture work applied to the cast. You can see glimpses of her chaotic, sketchy style in some areas like the hair, but most notably, I can see them under the eyes of Sofa-chan. This leads us into her affinity for horror, especially body horror. Things often look deliberately gross in her manga, but it adds another layer of that grimy textured look that she goes for. That was likely inspired by her years as an oil painter. Yu Hayashida is a big fan of Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira, and I think you can see a lot of that in the faces of the cast of Sofa-chan. Otomo had a preference for characters with rounder faces and pupils. Sofa-chan is kind of an awkward first step as you would expect, but it's cool to see how much she progressed over the years and found confidence in her style. I gotta give it to her because apparently over the years, her mother would say pretty harsh things about her artwork and told her that she sucked. But she really started to lean into her strength when she got to work on a manga adaptation for a game called Maken X. It's pretty impressive that Yu Hayashida, shortly after winning the Monthly Afternoon competition, got to work with Atlas on the creation of a manga. She'd been noted as being a pretty big gamer, and you can see her fan art of Bloodborne, and she said in the past that she greatly enjoys the Dynasty Warriors games. This is kind of like a dream job position for a lot of people, and she worked closely with Kazuma Kaneko and the producer Koji Okada. I've never played the game myself, but it seems to have a dark and industrial aesthetic. Speaking of which, Hayashida's artwork got a pretty big facelift here. From this point onward, she does not skip out on anything. Right off the bat in the first pages, there's already so many techniques that define her modern style. The grittiness of the artwork is somehow even more ramped up. There's a lot more textural lines applied and a smattering of gray tones that really help bring out the harshness of that artwork. It's really crazy if you look side by side at how the characters look in the game versus how they look in the manga. Hayashida might have not created the character designs, but she certainly molds them into her own thing. There's a character named Haki Andre, I don't know if I pronounced that right, and it's pretty apparent that she enjoys drawing him because of how creepy he looks. Which leads us to one of her other inspirations, which is none other than Junji Ito. For me, this is easiest to see in the ghastly expressions she often draws that remind me of something out of Spiral. Outside of the characters, I see people often neglect how much work she puts in her backgrounds. Almost every single page is jam-packed with an impressive amount of backgrounds that are extremely detailed. She didn't get to show her skills off in Sofa-chan for obvious reason, but here she goes all out with her backgrounds. The inspiration of Otomo and Nihei are starting to bleed through the pages. The backgrounds give off the same kind of hostility that are similar to the megastructure of Blame. There's a lot of cultural parts from China taken into the designs of Maken X, and Hayashida takes a lot of inspiration from Chinese work like Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Maken X was a very clear upgrade in terms of art, and a vital part of her career where she got to strut her stuff. It wouldn't be long at her time at Shogakukan's monthly Iki, where she would begin to launch her most famous project, Dorohedoro. This was my introduction to her as well as most people's introduction to her work. For me, it was love at first sight. I couldn't get enough of its wacky, nonsensical plot, and especially that standout art style. There's so much to talk about, but we're going to start with the best part of Dorohedoro, which is those insane character designs. Each one is an absolute masterpiece, starting off with Kaiman. I guarantee you that no other artist has thought about putting a lizard man and chucking a gas mask and a punk rock attire on him. Considering she worked on the manga until 2018, her style shifts around a lot, but personally my favorite look was at the beginning. She had a very grungy and gnarly art style. You'd think a design like this would be way too much, but it blends together into such a chaotic and memorable design. How she chooses to render a lot of his clothes, and especially his jacket, seems very improvised, which makes it even more insane. A lot of artists tend to have this problem where the sketch tends to look more energetic than the final product. Things can end up looking too smooth, which Hayashida is clearly not a fan of, and she does chaotic but controlled art perfectly. His companion Nikaido is more simple, and I think I can see remnants of Sofa-chan looking at her. She sports a similar militaristic look to Kaiman, and has that trash bag kind of texture to her black clothing. The most regular thing that she wears are actually her shoes, which appear to be some kind of Nike or Adidas high tops. It's actually a pretty common thing that some of the characters wear. Hugh Hayashida mentioned that she's a pretty big fan of sneakers, and fun fact, she actually designed Dorohedoro sneakers that you can't buy, and you probably shouldn't. For me, the biggest appeal for Nikaido is her cuteness contrasting with her rugged apparel, assuming she's actually wearing something, and it's not for the reasons you think. It's that combination of cute and scary that most of her characters tend to follow that makes them so much more likable. They may look like scary people, but a lot of them are very wacky and don't take themselves seriously. Yu Hayashida's appreciation for badass naked women comes out strong with characters like Nikaido. As for the antagonist of Dorohedoro, they're a lineup of smash hits. The magicians of the world of Dorohedoro typically don a set of masks, and each one of them is distinct in their own way. If the edgier fashion hasn't tipped you off yet, Yu Hayashida is a fan of metal, and a lot of people have drawn connections between some of the masks of the magicians to certain band members of Slipknot. There's also the Some people have also come to the conclusion that the punk subgenre called crust punk has influence over her artwork. If you look at a lot of fanzines for crust punk, you can see a similar messy art style all over them. If we look at the head honcho N, I can see a whole lot of inspiration at work here. I'm probably the only one that felt this way, but he always gave me Frank Booth vibes from Blue Velvet. The way that his mask braces around his face reminds me of Frank's oxygen mask that he holds tightly around his mouth. Not to mention the striped suit that he's also seen wearing sometime. There might be a little bit of Dragon Ball in his hair, but I think she just likes to draw wild haircuts. I think most people's favorite characters from En's family would probably be his cleaners, Shin and Noi. Shin looks pretty simple with just his black suit, but that allows the readers to be drawn to that amazing mask. It's kind of hard to divert your eyes from it, and it's one of the coolest mask design in fiction. Shin never fails to look so awesome in every scene that he's in. Noi, on the other hand, keeps that new metal trend with her jumpsuit that she's wearing. Now, Noi isn't your typical woman, but I'm really impressed by how many looks she can pull off with her. Sometimes she can look sort of refined, and other times she can have a ton of sex appeal, wrapped up in her tight black uniforms. Her peering red eyes paired up with her gray hair is the absolute chef kiss and makes her feel even more unique. Her face is also more rounded and cute looking. It's a mishmash of feminine and masculine traits that blend together very well. The last two members of En's gang are Ebisu and Fujita. We've seen some pretty intimidating looking designs so far, but I feel like Fujita and Ebisu are much more relatable in how they look. They're not towering mountains of meat, but short magic users with very little power. It's like if you took a real person and then thrust them into the hole. I could have said that better. Both of their designs look sort of dorky, but it has its charm. Fujita looks like a regular guy trying to look cool as possible. His mask is also one of my favorites in the series because it has a resemblance of Chris Fenn from Slipknot. There's a trope of Q Hayashida using skeletons a lot of in their artwork, like the ribbing on Kaiman's jacket, and Ebisu's mask is literally just a skull. Ebisu is an interesting case because the cute aesthetics with her are really ramped up. She feels ripped straight out of a Tim Burton story, with her aloof attitude and tragic backstory. All you have to do is take a good look at her and realize that there's not a single brain cell in there. They're just such a lovable group of dweebs. Honestly, I feel like the cast would fit very well into a fighting game or some kind of video game. Can someone please make that a reality? Anybody? When it comes to environments, they're just as gritty as the characters themselves. I've heard some people compare it to the walled city of Kowloon due to its claustrophobic and dense architecture, and I can see that. You could probably spend hours looking at the details on these things. The whole is definitely not a place that you want to live in, and it makes you wonder if there's really anything that's actually clean within there. The atmosphere that comes from all these stockpiles of buildings is utterly unique and grimy. If you were to get into Q Hayashida's work, I would recommend starting here, and preferably the manga, but the anime adaptation is actually pretty good despite the fact that there's a heavy usage of CG. The anime is currently finishing up its second season as I'm writing this, so maybe check it out. This isn't sponsored or anything, I just want more people to watch it so we're not stuck waiting in limbo for the third season. In between her work of Dorohedoro, she put out a couple one-shots. The first of these would see her return to her work on video games in 2011 with a collaboration with Suda51's Shadow of the Damned. Suda was actually a pretty big fan of Dorohedoro, so he wanted to get in contact with her to create some designs for the game. Translating these designs into the actual game probably was quite a task for the team. Alongside providing some of the designs for the game, she also worked on a prequel manga called Huva. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Since Shadow of the Damned takes place in Hell, her art fits like a glove and she leans fully into her horror aesthetics. The human characters in Dorohedoro could look absolutely grotesque, but that only serves to make the enemies look that much harder to look at. Some of these I don't even know what's going on with their designs to the point that it creates a level of distortion where it leaves your own mind to fill in the blanks. I'm not familiar with any of the enemies, but Fleming looks beyond cool. It's literally just a totem pole of skulls with a standard militaristic clothing. At this point, I think it's safe to say that she's found her style, and she's confident with it. It does make me want Suda to get working on a Dorohedoro game. That sounds like a literal dream. A year later, she provided another one-shot in 183 Degree E art book that featured many prominent manga artists. It's called Underground Underground. Q Hayashida is really good with technical stuff like backgrounds and buildings, so it would make sense that it transitions very well into mechanical things as well. The look of the world is a lot more industrial, with some enemies like Daruma having a unique spin on its design. Q Hayashida is really good at everything, even the guns look good. The only characters really worthy of note would be Barge. I see a more gothic inspiration in his design. He looks very reminiscent of the Grim Reaper with his large black coat and skull makeup. The skull makeup is a little touch that brings me back to the old school punk rock bands like Misfits. I love how much she embraces the punk rock ethos in her work. I respect her ability to stay true to herself and her unconventional approaches to things. The last one-shot she put out was based around the baseball team, the Hanshin Tigers. I never would have thought she would be into something like baseball, but she appears to be a pretty big fan. There's nothing noteworthy here, but you do get to see more of her avatar, which is cute as a button. The only thing I can get out of this is that she's actually capable of making something somewhat normal, and has more range than you would think. In 2018, Dorohedoro was starting to wrap up, which led people to ask what Q Hayashida was going to do next. The answer to that was die dark in 2019. So far, there's only been around 60 chapters, so I'm kind of limited to what I can talk about here. It's very exciting to see Q Hayashida lean into sci-fi settings, and it feels like a natural step from Dorohedoro. So far, the world of Die Dark isn't nearly as gross looking or as complex as the whole. She finds ways to make everything look interesting, however, and her variety of textures she applies to things like spaceships. The most notable one being the spaceship Moja, which looks like a skeleton of a dog with tumors attached to it. Even the ships look as bizarre as the character designs. The main characters, also known as the Four Evils, have striking silhouettes. Most of them are covered head and toe to black as usual, but they all have a ton of work put into them to make them look as distinct as possible. Oddly enough, they remind me of the Dark Judges from Judge Dredd. It doesn't help that Zaha Senko and Avakian look like executioners. You really gotta appreciate how much effort she puts into her drawings, because I know Avakian had to be a bitch to draw. Then there's the case of Shimada Death, who's definitely not Noi. But I just love the absurdity of the fact that the only thing she's covered up with are spikes or whatever those things are around her body. I'm sure it was also necessary to have the skulls around the kneecaps. In the colored art, she's shown having a red on her mask with piercing yellow eyes, which makes for a deadly combo. Also, for some reason, I think her mask is kind of cute. Hajime Damimaru might not look like that much of an interesting character on the surface with his Resident Evil 4 merchant getup, but once he dons his package, he quickly becomes one of my favorite designs she's made. It looks like nothing you'd see in sci-fi and more like something out of Lord of the Rings. The name even sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings, and no, I'm not going to pronounce that. Q Hayashida is one of those artists that you only come around so often that just hooks you instantly. Their style is utterly captivating in the way that it relentlessly carves out its own identity. I like pretty and clean artwork as much as the next guy, but it takes a lot of talent to make a mess look that good, and that's how I describe her work, a godly mess. With that being said, I know a lot of you probably aren't familiar with her work, but you need to check this stuff out. I didn't talk about the plot or any of her works outside of that, but they're just as fun and nonsensical as the artwork. If you have a favorite design of hers or anything else you like about her artwork, comment down below. Thank you for watching.